It's hard to explain how incredible the community was.
It's mainstay for African Americans because they couldn't move anywhere else.
And I think when you think about the history of Denver, or even the history of our country, it makes this neighborhood an extremely special neighborhood.
And I come here, it's like I feel like Norm from Cheers. What I want to do is for other folks to feel that.
You would feel good on the points. That was where everything happened.
Five Points grew out of downtown Denver. As it continued to grow northeast, Capitol Hill was started and grew north on the northeast west-south grid. So you have these two neighborhoods converge. In the 1890s, a trolley went down Welton Street, and one of the corners that it stopped at was 27th Street in Welton, 26th Avenue and Washington Street, and it created five corners at that intersection. And the trolley named that corner 5 Points instead of putting the names of all the streets on the marquee, and the name stuck. A lot of people weren't happy with it because it was a neighborhood in New York City that didn't have a great reputation. The history in the neighborhood is that it's always been a multi-ethnic neighborhood. We've had churches and synagogues and people throughout the neighborhood from every corner of the planet. So you talk about Korean or Japanese or Chinese or Italian, French, Swedish, German, African American, from all different types of faith. The changes in the population, the demographic changes, continue to change as we pass the turn of the century.
But in the 1920s, due to the rail car, this became an African American historical neighborhood.
Probably 50% or more of the neighborhood became African American. And a lot of black families moved into this neighborhood because the dads were working on the railroads. And so you had a lot of waiters and porters that lived in the neighborhood with their families. We also had a lot of industrial areas in town.
And so from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, it was bustling with businesses, bustling with residents, and that not only frequent Welton Street, but also the whole neighborhood.
I was born at 2323 Ogden Street in 1943. My dad worked for the railroad. He worked for DNRG. Like I said, I was just a little kid, but I remember him coming home with his Model T or Model A, whatever it was, and we would always be looking for him coming, driving up to the house. He would always bring us a treat in his lunch bucket that he took to work.
It's mainstay for African Americans because they couldn't move anywhere else. So redlining was a big part of the history.
They drew a boundary around the neighborhood that the banks wouldn't cross and other financial institutions wouldn't cross, so they wouldn't have to make any kind of investment. So if you were trying to buy a house, you couldn't get a loan from them, or there were issues with infrastructure.
The white people didn't allow you to go past Gaylord. You even if you had the money, it was very difficult. It was just the way it was. It just seemed to be a known fact.
That was a big part of why you had such a rich black population in 5 Points, and also the rich culture and heritage.
We had folks in the neighborhood that were pretty savvy with money and pretty innovative to create systems for our folks to gain resources.
And really, what was a driver in 5 Points was musically, this was the place to be. You had all your jazz greats. As a genre of music had, burgeoned in here in the United States, some of those same folks that were part of this genesis of jazz came here and stayed in 5 Points.
But the jazz history in 5 Points did create a national impact. We were called Harlem of the West. So you look at the stories that were happening in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and Denver, Colorado and Kansas City. We were part of that big story.
Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Cab Calloway, James Brown, Charlie Burrell, who was who is still, a huge part of Denver's music scene, and many of the others that were from Denver, and being able to play with some of these national acts. I mean, so we had it here.
They knew this was a place to come out and hang out and celebrate this music and the food and all the restaurants and the shops down here. We had a really incredible history with that music. And folks that didn't live in the neighborhoods, some of the white folks came down in here and hung out too.
So the Rossonian is really kind of the kind of flagship of 5 Points, if you will. In its heyday, it was the place to be. It was the place that everyone went, especially the 30s, the 40s, 50s. It was it was an upscale place where everyone would go.
My older brother would take me down to the Rossonian, and there was a room. The bar was there at the Rossonian. It was a V-shaped bar, but he would take me back in the back room, which you had to go up some stairs and go through a door and come down in, and that was where all the good stuff was going on.
And it had that, cachet, across the country for musicians to, you have to go play and stay at the Rossonian.
Some of the big bands would come, like James Brown and the Famous Flames.
But the nationally renowned folks coming in to our neighborhood that like to hang out with our musicians who were incredible at their craft and really, really gave them a new level of what the artist is doing.
It was so fun. It was so much fun, and you felt the music. It just, the feeling. It was lively. I mean, as you can get from me, that I hung out a lot at the clubs.
Yeah, and so, after the 60s, late 60s and 70s, and of course, with the ability to go elsewhere, a lot of African Americans did leave this neighborhood. And because the neighborhood was so rich with, doctors and accountants and your lawyers, and sometimes some of those individuals left this neighborhood. And so you had a time of despair, especially in the late 60s, early 70s and 80s, and continued on to the early 2000s.
80s and 90s, especially the 90s, really made a big impact. I think it was a good intention to put the light rail here, but the side effects of the process was quite impactful. It really hurt some of the businesses during construction because you couldn't get access to them.
You didn't have the consistency of some of the businesses and continuity of community, and you had economic despair. Many of the things that happened here in 5 Points happened also across the country.
People were trying to get out of 5 Points because it was a black community, and I would never define 5 Points as a ghetto, but people were trying to try to better yourself. You would move out of there and move like what is now Park Hill.
Unfortunately, the neighborhood was deemed blighted by City Council in 2012. That put a nail in the coffin of some of the businesses here too.
That's the one thing I make sure I do, is give respect to the folks that were here before we were here. There wasn't a whole lot that was down here. Opening up in a revitalizing neighborhood that at that time in 2010, it was a neighborhood that had a negative connotation to it. And 2010 was the height of the economic downturn as well. I will describe how I see it now, which is a very inclusive, safe, dynamic, culturally rich neighborhood. You know, we donate 97% of our space. We make sure that we make ourselves available to meet whatever needs our community asks. So I can tell you now the conversation is, how do we continue to tell the stories about the history and the spaces that we're in right now, and while we develop other areas of this area.
Probably I get a smile on my face when I think about like my childhood. To describe running from 24th and Welton from my grandfather's liquor store to maybe 30th and Downing to go get a burrito from La Hacienda was the most magical thing for me. And I would run down Welton Street. You know, some of my grandfather's friends would, "Hey, little Harris, slow down." I program a lot of events and community celebrations here in Five Points. The biggest one is called Juneteenth Music Festival. It's a 2-day celebration that happens down here in Five Points, which celebrates Juneteenth. Attracts about 50,000 people. Another one is called the Five Points Jazz Festival. It's organized by Denver Arts and Venues, but my nonprofit also brings in all the vendors and helps with beverage execution. The festivals have been one of the, integral parts of the cultural fabric of our neighborhood. Specifically with Juneteenth, it's been a part of the Five Points community over 50 years. I sincerely believe that music vibrates a little bit differently here in the neighborhood. Like, these bricks have 100 years of, rocking and rolling to some of the greatest musicians who have ever lived. For Juneteenth to be a part of that legacy is just amazing as well.
Right now, you get a mix of everything, right? You have a mix of different genres of music, especially in Cervantes and the Roxy. But what I'm glad to see is that at least is the continuity, that music is alive in Five Points. And we look forward to bringing more of that back to Five Points. I remember going in the Rossonian in 2000. But I always knew about the history of the Rossonian. And so that history was just always so, not only just alluring, engaging. And so for me, I've been a part of dreaming about it and having a vision for the Rossonian even since then. So that was almost 20 years ago. And so I work with, the previous owner, Carl Bourgeois, on just visioning what the Rossonian could be. I'm just glad to be a part of a group and a team to reinvest in the Rossonian and bringing the Rossonian back to life. And that's what's really exciting for me in a project that's so meaningful, not only just for the Five Points community, the African American community, but for the city of Denver. And so this would be the restaurant. The other side will be the kind of the lobby and so forth.
I think ultimately to finally see someone perform and to get a bite to eat and to maybe even stay in a room in the Rossonian is going to be amazing.
I've on and off been on this project for about 12 years. There has been a history to revitalize this place, and so we count it special, and that's why we take our time in doing what is right.
The challenge we have now is it's a double-edged sword. We've got a combination of gentrification in the neighborhood and still have redlining in the neighborhood. So this depends on who you are and where the resources are. So if you're gentrifying the neighborhood, you can get access to resources. If you've lived here for 50 years and you're trying, you still have a battle, an uphill battle.
I think right in our history, I want us to be in control of what that is. The folks that were here and maybe got pushed out, the folks that are coming to as new people in this neighborhood, that we come together and have a combined vision of what it is and what it looks like. And I think that's what matters most.
This is a unique treasure Denver has in this historical district. It's only a historical district in Colorado. To be able to engage in, and I think everyone should have a positive mindset of what the future is going to hold. I'm excited for Denver for having that, and the leaders for putting this as important to not only preserving the history, but allowing the history to be in the present and as well as the future.
I love and appreciate the fact that this is such a polarizing neighborhood. What I mean by polarizing is the word gentrification is the big buzzword around here. And gentrification means different things to different people. But no matter who you are, somebody has an opinion about this neighborhood, where it's been and where it's going.
Everybody knew everybody. Everyone knew everybody, and I could probably rattle off all the neighbors right now, that we lived with. And so far as growing up, I mean, for living down on the Five Points, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I would not trade it for anything.
There's so many thousands of amazing stories to know. We just have. I just love being part of this community. I feel so honored to be a part of it and say that this is my history and these are my ancestors.
I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I think there's plans to develop the area north of us into this very vibrant retail, food and beverage, entertainment space. We make sure that folks can see, can hear, can feel, and can smell and can taste the story of what was here before.
In our nation, of course, redlining created a neighborhood such as Five Points. And so, despite that, African Americans and the Black community really used it as a treasure instead of, we can only be here, is even today, we want to be here.
I mean, ask me why I'm passionate about 5 Points. It's probably like asking a Denver Bronco fan, like, why are they passionate about, about their home team? Like, this is my home team.